Hello and welcome to the Utopia Lecture. The Utopia Lecture is one of my personal favorites because what I have always loved about being a designer is that you dream up a better future. And if that notion sounds like a surprise to you, then maybe you should think about becoming a designer because that is the main thing we do. I have to say that I have experienced many students who did not realize that that is an expectation in them. As a designer, it is not enough to just make more stuff of the same kind. It's not even enough to just make more good stuff. Really, what we should be doing as designers is we should use our insight to create a better future. And I'm dedicating this lecture to people who have done that, showing you examples of really utopian visionary people, how they've done it, and how perhaps you can also do it if you want to. So first of all, what is that thing? This word utopia, what do we mean by that? There is a pretty good definition of it. I've found this to be the best description: an imagined place or state of things in which everything is perfect. So we can already imagine this doesn't really exist, but it is something we want to aspire to. And it is something we each need to have in our minds so that we have a place to go to, a place to strive towards. An ideal place, paradise, heaven, heaven on earth, Eden, Garden of Eden, Shangri-La, you name it, all these different things that I have listed down here. That is what utopia is. But first and foremost, what it really is an ideal society. Now, what is the ideal society? I think it breaks down into two words. Society is one and ideal the other. And that makes it quite manageable, really, when you think about it, because once we're talking about ideals, you can list words. So ideal by what standard? You can have an ideal standard, you can have an ideal society by maybe sustainable standards, or by comfort standards, or by intelligent standards, in terms of aesthetics, in terms of security, care, ethics, you name it. Maybe all of these, wouldn't that be nice? But obviously, it cannot ever be all of these. What it boils down to is if you're going to create for an ideal, you need to have that ideal in the first place, and you need to choose what it is. Are you going to be all about sustainability? Are you going to be all about comfort? All about intelligent? All about beautiful? Your choice. You're the designer, but you've got to have one or more of these. And then finally, that will find its way into society, and it will make society, because what you create will be used by many, and many will associate themselves with what you put in front of them. So in the end, we could probably say utopia is a place where all societal issues are fully resolved. What do we mean by societal issues? I'll give you an example here now. Many, actually. You may not have heard of wicked problems. Wicked problems aren't, well, they are kind of wicked because they're a little evil, but they're also wicked because they cannot actually be easily described. Here's what a wicked problem is. A wicked problem is ill-defined, not well understood, and has no known solution. And these are the big problems in society, and they are the problems that people with a utopian mindset want to see abolished. Let's give you some examples of these. Examples of wicked problems that we cannot define well, have not understood perfectly, and don't have a final solution for are poverty, crime, health, well-being, pollution, education, integration, safety, transport, and old age. And this is by no means the end of it. You could probably continue this list for many pages. But what is important to understand here is that utopian society is a place where these big things are taken care of. And where do we come in? We're only designers, aren't we? Only designers. Well, I think we are exactly the people who should be utopian in our outlook, because there won't be too many others who actually have that in their job descriptions. So, as designers, we can effect reform and thereby progress. And I think the term progress is one that is no longer viewed as part of civilization. Maybe I'm just getting old now, but when I was a little boy, there was no question that the future was going to be a place where all problems were going to be considerably less, and there were going to be fantastic solutions for everything. These days, I'm not sure we still feel this way, but I think we should. Somebody has to, and that is us. We designers need to be the ones who hold up the flag of, yes, there is going to be progress, and yes, we know how to get there, and we will do our best to cause progress. How can we actually do this? Where is our place as designers in the world? Well, I think we can reach a lot of people with our work. The products that we create as product and industrial designers reach masses of people. Whatever goodness you pack into them, whatever progress you pack into them, will make the world a slightly more utopian, slightly better place wherever these products are used. The same goes for any systems that you might create as a designer, or any services that you might create. And last not least, maybe you're not designing products, systems, or services. Maybe you are a design educator who brings design thinking to companies and governments and institutions, and there is an enormous reformative potential in that, because if people begin to believe in progress again and in a better civilization and in a better future, because you bring that hope and that mindset to them, well, you will have caused much utopianism to take hold of society. You may wonder who you're even able to communicate with as a designer, and I think you might be surprised. In this little graph here, I'm trying to show you just how vast the number of our possible conversation partners actually is when we are designers. We designers can talk with anyone about anything because we are generalists. You see the orange bar there at the top? That's us designers. It stretches all the way across. We can talk a little bit about engineering, about management, about research, about prototyping, about marketing, about accounting, about PR. And then you're looking at these other professions underneath them, and you see the extent of the red bars, and that's how far these guys can go. Yeah, a researcher can talk about research, and that's the end. Maybe they can talk about prototyping, a little bit about management, but that's probably it. So we have a lot of insight as designers that other professions don't normally have. I call this a unique holistic vision capability. So we can see holistically, we can see the big picture. We have to, because if we cannot be designers. When did that begin, that whole utopia thing? I don't suppose there were Neanderthals sitting in their caves dreaming of coffee makers. Something happened, and I think this graphic here explains what went on. Up until the Renaissance, I know I'm simplifying here, but for the purposes of this lecture, let's keep it that way. The world worked like you see here on the left. There was mankind, and they sought validation for their existence through religion and through the hierarchies that they served under. So basically, before Renaissance, life was like, if I want validation, the right to live as a human being, I need to seek permission from religion, and I need to seek permission from the hierarchies, and they have the right to take whatever they want from me anytime. And then Renaissance happened, and humanism happened, and everything changed. And suddenly, mankind itself, the human being, became the center of, destiny making, if you will. Suddenly, we humans decided which spirituality we chose, which outputs we wanted to generate, who we trusted for validation, and how we organized. So, this shift to the human centered image, I think, is what really caused utopianism to pop up and become possible. This dreaming of a better future for us humans and really changing things to a better society started then with humanism. I'll bring you some visionary authors here who have done some fantastic work at the time. Jules Verne, or Jules Verne, as you would say in English, was an author who wrote a large number of really amazing books that by today's standards we would call science fiction. And some people claim he's a space alien. Some people say he must have been a time traveler because he was so good at foreseeing things that then later actually happened, that it is simply astonishing. Here, I'll show you some. He wrote a story, I think it was in the 1880s, about a rocket being sent to the moon. And incredibly, this was set in America. Now, the man was French, yet he somehow thought, okay, if there's going to be travel to the moon, it will be an American thing. And you can see this moon rocket here on the left going to the moon in an old illustration. And it's rather quaint that it seems to have a chimney, and it also, I read the book, it also has a balcony at the back where you can step out and have a cigar as you travel to the moon through the air, because they didn't know that there was no air. But let's check out this next image. Check this out. Here's what actually happened. About 80 years later, the Americans did shoot a rocket to the moon, and isn't it incredibly similar looking to what Jules Verne envisioned? And also the capsule that ended up landing in the ocean, just as it was predicted, exactly the same concept. So he was extremely lucid in imagining how things would be. And I don't think Jules Verne was an alien. I also don't think he was a time traveler. And I also don't think he was a clairvoyant. I think he was just a very bright guy who could think straight. And it was simply clear that if somebody went to the moon and came back, that this is how it would have to be. And this proved right in France in the 1880s, and it also proved right for the Americans in the 1960s. Here's another one of his examples. Here's a person listening to the voice of someone projected to a screen, and they're conversing in real time. This is also from the 19th century. And it is really Skype when you think about it. It's remote, yeah, telephone plus video. Again, was Jules Verne clairvoyant? No, he simply thought of something that would be cool to have. And this is how utopianism works. You just dream. You just dream up something you'd really, really like to have. And how do you get there? Honestly, I think the best way to arrive at utopian thinking is to be indulgent, give in to your lazy side. Just do the unthinkable and say, I wish it were like that. And that's all you need to do. And you have created a utopian vision. I wish it were like that. Gene Roddenberry is the famous author of the Star Trek series. And I'm sure you've seen some of these Star Trek films. The one that I grew up with, the first series, was remarkable in that it was comprised of a crew where every crew member came from a different country. So it was unthinkable. This was the time of the Cold War, yet you had an American commander and a Russian officer and a Scottish guy and even an extraterrestrial. So Gene Roddenberry's vision of the future was one of complete integration, where it really didn't matter anymore where you were from as long as you played it by the rules of the ship. And that is really the vision that we are now living. It took a good 30, if not 40 years for this vision to really take hold in Western civilization. But here we have it. Utopia has also been portrayed in films many times. Ideal Worlds, here's another Star Trek series. Now, I'm not sure if you've seen this one, but there you first hear the notion of a world where all the problems that we now have been abolished. They don't actually explain to you how they've done it in the film because perhaps Gene Roddenberry doesn't really know how it could happen. But it doesn't matter. The main thing is for somebody to say, the world that I aspire to doesn't have these problems. So this is what a world like that would look like, according to some movie artists. It doesn't explain really why they no longer use money or why they no longer use or have any problems with illnesses and hunger, but doesn't matter. What we have here is an image of a place where these things no longer exist. And as long as nobody creates that vision, nobody will aspire to it. So it is very important for a designer to step up and say, I believe that we should have a world where these problems don't exist. We're back to Jules Verne now, the French science fiction author who created the character Captain Nemo, a scientist who decided he no longer wanted to put up with the cruelty and stupidity of mankind and created his own subterranean kingdom where he was the ruler. And he had a nuclear submarine and he had subterranean and submarine gardens and apart from mankind. Now that was a utopianism that was perhaps a little sad, but it is a utopian vision just the same. Here's someone who turns the ocean into their perfect society. If you've seen Lord of the Rings, there is a portrayal of Hobbiton and the Shire, and that in itself is also utopia. It's a wonderful world. There aren't any real problems there. It is a world where the hobbits live happily, and I think that in itself can also count as a kind of utopia. Who wouldn't want to live there? Honestly, I'd like it. I'd put up with the big feet and 7 meals a day, no problem. Maybe you've heard of the Avatar depression. That seemed to be an ailment that befell moviegoers after viewing Avatar for the first time or second time. In the movie Avatar, a really wonderful world was depicted, and it was so perfect that it made people depressed about the state of the real world that they had to live in. So you can see the power of these dreams, of these visions. There is a very strong appeal in this, and we are in the appeal business as designers. Not surprisingly, politicians will often use utopian visions to drive their agendas forward. I've compiled a few sample images of countries that are at the forefront of doing this. These are countries with a strong agenda, a strong utopian agenda that want to eradicate problems and turn themselves into a society according to a number of ideals. You'll probably find that all countries will want to live by their ideals, but I'm not convinced that every country is thinking of its ideals as something that will lead to progress, as a lot of countries are simply trying to maintain the status quo. But these are progressive countries that are seeking out ideals with the purpose of becoming better places. Singapore is one of them. New Zealand is another country. When I lived in New Zealand, my impression was that it was very much a mirror image of Great Britain. And when you ask travelers who come back from New Zealand, they will often tell you, yeah, New Zealand is like the UK without the problems. It's not entirely true, of course, but this is how New Zealand largely sees itself, and they're doing a pretty good job at being that slightly more cleaned up version of the UK. It is a utopian thing to do, I think. Uruguay, a very interesting country that has often historically also adopted very progressive stances and done interesting things, like they were the first to introduce the vote for women. They were the first to have, I think it was pensions or something like that. Recently, they introduced, well, legalized marijuana as I think the first country in South America. So very progressive, very free thinking, and very much with the best interests of humanity in mind. Sweden has historically been a place where all kinds of things have been tried out to make society a better place to live in. And it has to be said, the Soviet Union at the time was an ambitious place as well. Now, it didn't go so well, but when they started, they were very determined to make this a great place to live. And many of the programs they created sounded good on paper. It may not surprise you, but utopia is a concept in commerce as well. In commerce, we create little worlds. Look at this, Laura Ashley. This is a Laura Ashley paradise. Everything in here is by Laura Ashley. IKEA. These are worlds. Worlds created according to ideals, to be better and to be different. Jeep is a brand that doesn't just make cars. I have a Jeep pajama, for crying out loud. I mean, you can buy into the whole philosophy of a company these days with the help of this entire jungle of products that they're creating. Chanel. You don't just smell like it, you become that world. You become Chanel. I'm not sure if they still do it, but when I was a boy, Camel had this tradition of a trophy. Camel makes cigarettes, but they were pretty good at being more than that, being bigger than cigarettes. So they somehow turned it around so that When you bought those cigarettes, you really became part of their universe. And that universe was one of sturdy boots and Land Rovers going across the Amazon and things like that. So that is also a way of creating a world. And now we're getting more designy. You'll find that a lot of cities were created with grand utopian visions in mind. I think the number one city in that regard is Brasilia, the capital of Brazil. It was created in the middle of nowhere, and the idea was to create the ideal capital city. So they started from scratch on a blank sheet, really, if you will, or in a field. And they created this ideal city according to the ideals of the time. There were other proposals for ideal cities created from scratch and always following a certain ideal. So here we had Seward's vision of the indoor city. When the oil boom first hit in Alaska, everybody envisioned that there would be millions of people migrating north to Alaska for jobs. And of course, how do you build a nice city in Alaska? Well, you build as much of it indoors so that you can enjoy its pleasures year round. Mel Johnson came up with Booze Town as a proposal, very amusing. So this was a city created for the purposes of indulging in alcohol, and everything around this city was supposed to be around alcohol. Too bad it never actually took off. I don't know what happened. The company Ford, car manufacturer, actually created a settlement in Brazil that was built according to the standards and ideals of Ford Motor Company. So it was all about making cars back there. And as you might know, Henry Ford had his own quite pioneering mentality. So for him, it was important that his workers would actually get enough money to themselves own the products they made. So it was a fairly democratic and fair thought that was behind all this. The American architect Frank Lloyd Wright, whose name you might have heard, came up with the idea of a city where everything is locally made. And it's interesting that this notion was as utopian then as it is now, but we are actually getting closer to being able to do it now because centralization is going away. We are seeing a glimpse of a world where if you want to have something made, all you need is a CAD model of it, and you could have it 3D printed locally. If you want a certain shoe, you just go to your shoe printer and you have that shoe printed, no matter where that CAD model came from. And this old vision of Frank Lloyd Wright is probably getting pretty close to becoming more real. Also note the drones that are flying around here. This image is from 1932. Amazing, isn't it? So who are these interesting utopian designers and thinkers that have been doing their stuff in the past? I'll bring a few here to you. One of the most famous names here is Buckminster Fuller, an American architect, also called Bucky, with the geodesic dome, how to build one, that is. And I think to me he is utopian in attitude because he did these things because they could be done. So he had these abstract thoughts and he thought, what if we turn this into a building? It has never been done before, but it will have a lot of advantages if we do it this way. And that's what makes a utopian. You don't care if people recognize it. You don't care if it's been done before. What you care about is that it has qualities that you believe in and you push forward with that. So here he proposed a dome for a city to keep the city clean and rain-free. And it was actually not entirely infeasible. This, I think, is an image from the Olympic Stadium in Munich. And as we can see, these kinds of structures that he was envisioning there in his office stand up perfectly well. And I think this is in itself over 40 years old now. He did a lot of these kinds of things. As you can see here, this is Buckminster Fuller with one of his structures, this time fiberglass, I believe. And surprisingly, a car. So he really wanted to recreate the world, the civilized world, entirely. And he had his own ideas on just about anything. And that car, I thought, was really amazing because at the time, it had a fuel economy and performance that looks pretty much like what our cars do these days, 80 years on. It only had one problem. It crashed a few times and killed a few people. So that is why, unfortunately, this thing didn't go anywhere. But he tried. And with today's methods, I'm sure it actually would have made a difference. This car wasn't just more fuel efficient and faster than the cars at its time. It was also more aerodynamic. It had a lot more interior space, and it only had 3 wheels, which also enabled it to turn on the spot. So it was full of fantastic ideas, doing things better than the cars of its time. Here you can see inside. And here's a drawing of the vehicle. They called it the Dymaxion car. I think Buckminster Fuller's stuff was always called Dymaxion. That was his word. Another famous man of the time was Le Corbusier. Le Corbusier, that was actually only his self-chosen name. His full name is Charles-Édouard Généry-Gris, and he was originally French but became Swiss, I believe. I thought that was the story. Anyway, he who gave us this. Now, you might think, what's that? This is a perfectly ordinary city. It looks like maybe somewhere in Moscow or in Beijing. The thing is, though, when he came up with these drawings, that was not normal. That did not exist. This is the result of some very straight and clear-minded thinking. And you have to imagine the world around 1900, 1910 was a world where everything was still quaint cottages and the big cities were not big and barely anybody had vehicles. So he envisioned a future where everybody would have a car and where the cities would be huge. Now, why would he do such a thing? Well, he simply put two and two together. He thought, okay, it is clear that there is a huge interest in these automobiles, and everybody will eventually have one and be able to afford them because they're making them cheaper and cheaper and better, and everybody will be able to have these. And also, the explosion of population was something everybody saw coming, even at the time. You know, you just do some math and you realize that the population of the world can only go up. And so he started thinking about a world where you'd have to put oodles of cars and millions of people into the same place. What does that look like? And that looks exactly like what we have now. The first building that was built in this fashion was the Cité Radieuse in Paris, and it looked like this. That was his building, Le Corbusier, and he envisioned that the people would live very happily and jump up and down and be on the roof garden of it, and that it would be a blast to live in this thing. We know now, of course, that it isn't exactly that fun to live in a big block of concrete, but it seemed adventurous and amazing at the time, and people still obviously go for it. Obvious advantages. Being the space use wizard that he was, he also thought about using office space differently, and he came up with these of his cubicles that are now quite common everywhere. Like this, doesn't it? So you have all these, actually I think there are 25 million people in Shanghai, and they live in these things quite comfortably. Maybe he took it a little too far. Le Corbusier seriously thought that at a day and age when all buildings would be super space efficient and blocky, the villas of the rich would also be like that. And that's probably where he was wrong, because not everybody intellectually buys into this whole thing. So this is the one where he was off. He thought this was how the rich and beautiful were going to live. He also thought of offering a car to the world, of course, and this was also quite logically thought out. He was of the opinion that vehicles should have their engines in the back and that they should have a drop shape so that they would be aerodynamically optimized, not offer too much wind resistance. And he basically preempted the VW bug by a good 20 years. So this is VW bug or Beetle that came out in the late 30s, and it was based on exactly the same ideas. And again, they didn't make that because they were quarks. They did this because it made a lot of sense at the time. So I think the key to being a utopian thinker is to do what's logical and to do it first and to do it in the face of convention. This year is my perfect favorite utopian. He isn't so much of a designer as more of an illustrator. His name is Sid Mead. He's an artist who dreams of the future, and he says himself that what he shows is society dreaming of and posing with technology. So he admits to loving civilization and the beauty of it and the grace of it in in times when technology will have progressed and great things will become possible. So he creates images whose visual language is reminiscent of advertising in the United States in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. Here's a car ad, Chrysler ad from the 70s in America. And I think what Sid Mead's images do really well is they evoke that spirit of here it is, the glorious new technology, comfortable, confident, in your face, and you can have it. Of course, it's realistic. 1970s, who knows, 2050s. Hydrogen powered, amazing vehicle with genetically modified cuddle tiger, big spaceship thingy in the background. So here we are, generally enjoying the future in all its glorious, realistic detail. That is what I love about Sid Mead's paintings. He's not afraid of showing detail. He's committing to technical solutions. You look at this thing and you go, yeah, I can imagine how this comes together. Another Sid Mead painting of a vehicle that somehow balances on only one wheel. Now, when he painted this in the 1970s, there was no way on earth somebody could offer a feasibility or viability assessment for this. Everybody would say, yeah, no way you can do this. But the point is, he said, I wish we could do this. I wish you could have a vehicle that's just like a hood for your shoulders and torso, and other than that, you just step on its one wheel and off you go, and that's your vehicle, and you wear your vehicle. That's what I wish we had. Now, times have changed, technology has caught up, and it is increasingly possible to do this. If you've seen the solo wheel, that's really what that is. And here we have huge vehicles as big as ships, and again, genetically modified animals. Like I said, what I like about Sid Mead is his optimism. There is none of that blackness of, yeah, it's all going to end in nuclear holocaust. He's of the opinion the future will be brilliant and it will be beautiful and full of huge, wonderful American things. And I have to say, I like that spirit that we should be in as designers, because if we don't believe in the future, we're not going to design anything, are we? So we need, first and foremost, we need to become optimistic again and believe turn out well, and that we will be having anti-gravity vehicles like these, visiting amazing locations like those, probably on strange planets, and that it will all work out fine. And just on a final note, here's one more man I think you need to see. His name is Theo Jansen. He is Dutch. That's the man. And he came up with this completely conceptual, wonderful thing he called the Strandbeest. It's a, I wouldn't know how to call this. It's not a creature. It is a structure that is powered by the wind, and it walks. If you do a video search on the web for Theo Jansen, you will find these things walking, striding across beaches in the Netherlands, and it is stunning. And he doesn't know what these are going to accomplish, but he knows he has developed this new kind of leg kinematic which mimics animal legs, and the beaches could be inhabited by these wind-powered animals that will take care of themselves. So I think what I'm trying to say with this is being utopian can also mean having found something interesting and not knowing how to implement it, but making it visible and standing your ground with it. One day, somebody might find a perfectly good use for this thing that Theo Jansen has invented. Design and the societal process. Now, I promise you this is the last slide, which will make this a nice 45-minute lecture. I think this is really how you need to operate as a designer. Convention is what you build on. That is the road behind you. It's not bad. You know, the road that you've traveled on is never bad. It's just behind you. That's the thing. It's not coming up anymore. It's behind you. It's gone. And what you're driving on is a road built on values. You know your current values and you can imagine the future values. And if you cannot imagine them, well, perhaps you need to wish for them and you need to express your desire for what they might be. As a creator, you create future values. You just need to say what you want them to be. And that will lead to an ideal world. And the ideal world is ideal by whatever wishes you make. So if you want it to be something, it will be that. It will need to be done by the visionary designers of the present, who are you. So it's on us and you, designers, to make it all happen. And I hope you've been finding this lecture inspiring, and I wish you all the best.